But at the end of the day, at a certain level, you don't lose. You can't lose. There is no losing because you're everywhere and your tentacles are invested on every side of the aisle in every country. So there is no real losing for those people. But we who are going to lose the hegemony of the dollar in this country, and potentially countries don't want to trade with us, we're screwed. But the oligarchs, they don't give a shit. They make money, whichever stock market is doing well, they're doing good in it. They don't care.
I'm going to read you a statement. You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it. Is that clear? You think you merely stopped a business deal? That is not the case. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars.
Who is this from? Wait, who is this from and to? I didn't hear that.
I'll tell you when I'm done. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back. It is ebb and flow, tidal gravity. It is ecological balance. You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems, one vast, inhumane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars, petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichsmarks, Rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things of today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature, and you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale? You get on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont and Dow, Union Carbide and Exxon. These are the nations of today. What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, min-max solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments just like we do. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is of a collage of corporations inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. It has been since man crawled out of the sublime. Pedo, that's true.
Okay.
To see that perfect world in which there's no war or famine, oppression or brutality, one vast and ecumenical holding company for whom all men will work to serve a common profit, which all men will hold a share of stock. All necessities provided, all anxieties tranquilized, all boredom amused. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel. That's the truth. There are no countries. This is all about multinational corporations, or as our friend over at Status Quo likes to say, the United Corporations of America, because that's what we are.
This was one of the reasons I wanted to cover that story about Iran putting out that threat against the corporations that I didn't get to, and then you didn't cover on Saturday. But anywho, Colin, do you have there was like a series of 3 things regarding the helium. There were 2 articles and then a post. Yeah. And do you have I put them in the right order. So is this the one? No, this was not right. This is like the last one. Yeah, this is the first one. Yes. Thank you. So guys, we're talking about, oh, Sonny wants us to ask the Gaza death toll question. Yeah, we'll ask when we meet up with people. So one of the things that we're not talking about when we're talking about what's going on in killing the oil refineries and blowing up all of the infrastructure that we get our fossil fuels from, and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz and what all that means. And there's a lot more at stake than just fossil fuels. We've talked about rare earth minerals, but one of the biggest things that is at risk, and I really wasn't aware of this, and I sort of went down this little rabbit hole on this, and we'll get over to Bill Clinton in a second and how this ties back to him, because it kind of does. It kind of does. So this article was the best concise I found, because there were so many articles that go into different details about why the helium matters. And I'm going to read this article But the key point is that this is a global thing, and it's going to be affecting everybody in a way that I don't think people really understand how this will come into play. So why the Iran-Israel war matters for the world's helium supply. Scroll. Okay. An overlooked consequence of the US and Israeli conflict with Iran is the shock to the global helium trade. While headlines have focused on oil price spikes and liquefied natural gas disruptions, helium extracted as a byproduct of natural gas processing has emerged as a strategic choke point for advanced economies. Qatar supplied roughly 1/3 of the world's 190 million cubic meters of helium in 2025. Iranian drone strikes on Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial complex and the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz forced the country to halt production at the world's largest helium facilities. The disruption began, the disruption began around March 2nd, when Qatar declared a force majeure on liquefied natural gas in shipments. Because helium is recovered, which I didn't know this, I had no idea. So helium isn't its own product in a sense of, you don't just go get helium. Helium is a derivative, right? So because helium, it's recovered during the natural gas liquefaction. When you halt the liquefied natural gas production, you're also halting the helium production. And why does that matter? Why does helium matter? People wonder, is it just about making, high-pitched voices at parties and sucking air out of balloons? And no, shock. Yeah. It is not about that. So actually forward, because I'm not caring about the prices. I want to show the part where we're talking about, you could scroll a little bit, because this is about where it's from and whatever, but the containers, here it is. Helium's strategic importance stems from its physical properties and its role in advanced technology supply chains. This is where it's interesting. No other gas combines an extremely low boiling point, chemical inertness, high thermal conductivity, and non-flammability at an industrial scale. Semiconductor manufacturing is one of the largest sources of demand, accounting for roughly 21 to 25% of global consumption, as it relies on helium to maintain ultra-clean cooling environments. So engineers also use it to detect microscopic leaks in advanced fabrication tools and ultraviolet lithography. There are some very high-tech equipment. And by the way, this will affect AI, because those data centers need cooling, and the cooling is done by the helium. That's how this is all going to work. Helium, and this is where it gets really even more important, also supports critical medical infrastructure. Liquid helium cools the superconducting magnets used in MRI machines, more than 14,000 of which operate worldwide. Aerospace injuries use it to pressurize rocket fuel tanks, purge propulsion systems. So there's a myriad of whole things. And there's no substitutes for helium. It says, unlike oil, helium has few substitutes. And while there can be recycling in some systems, it's just not common, and there's not enough, right? So at some point, we're going to have a helium problem because we're not getting it anymore. So what is that going to look like? So Colin, could you go to the second article?
This is why there's a chance that Trump is going to get kicked out of office.
Okay. So guys, this is very interesting. So the US actually has traditionally had a huge supply of helium. In fact, we had the largest reserves of helium on the planet. And so just like everything else, we thought, let's privatize it and make some money off of it. So and by the way, this whole procedure to buy the helium or to sell off our national reserves of helium, it started, I want to say, back in 2019. The sale didn't finally go through until 24. That's what this article is from. So we're going to flash back to February of 24, where we are told that the federal government is wanting to sell off its helium reserve, and some industries are pushing back. So please scroll up, because there's a part of this article that is the key thing right here. So why are there people pushing back on getting rid of those reserves? Well, because any catastrophe into the global supply chain, I don't know, like a war in Iran, could then have major consequences globally for all different industries. Okay, so to answer the question as to why the United States sold off its helium reserves, we have to go back. We go back to a congressional session on April 30th, 1996, a time when Republicans in Congress were enthusiastic about cutting government spending. The national, and now I'm quoting, the National Helium Reserve has really been a laughingstock, I think, for several decades. Then Wisconsin Representative Scott Klug said on the House floor. I
gotta tell you, I initially read that as Scott Slug instead of
Scott Klug. So this in 96, this guy, Representative Klug from Wisconsin, said the old helium reserve was a perfect example of ballooning government waste. In 1996, it's clear that blimps have absolutely nothing to do with national security, Klug said. They may have to do with some intriguing shots at the halftime of Monday Night Football game, but I think they managed to do that without support from the federal government. Therefore, the Helium Privatization Act passed later that year, and President Bill Clinton signed it into law. Shocking. A few years later, the government started selling off its stockpiles of helium. Okay. Then the market went crazy. And this is where it all starts to go out of control. So now we know that this sale that they had opened up in 1996, it started getting pushed through the particular sale that did go through, I believe, in 2019. Keep going up, scroll. You have no idea. Like this was so unbelievably like crazy. So keep going. A potential shutdown of the reserve right here. Right now. So after a few years of delays, the federal officials finally revealed the bids from private companies. We're back into 24. So this was in 24 when we're looking at that they're getting ready to sell off the reserves. 96 is how come we're allowed to do that. Thank you, Bill Clinton. And so the transfer is when things are going to go sideways. So now that did go through. Colin, pull up that last picture that said, okay, this is what it is. So the BLM helium system sale provided $460 million. We sold it for $460 million. The Bureau of Land Management did. Keep scrolling. Yeah. Wait, what was the date? Go back up for a second. What was the date on this one? Where was this? Because this was just like right after. Okay, so this was at the end of that year. So this was who finally bought the helium. So where did those helium reserves go to? What private? So the Bureau of Land Management transferred $460 million in proceeds from the sale of federal helium system to the U.S. Treasury, marking the conclusion of a historic program that served the nation for nearly a century. The sale of the federal helium system, directed by congressional direction under the Helium Stewardship Act of 2013, okay, it was 2013, reflects the BLM's commitment to ensuring the efficient and responsible management of the nation's helium resources. Helium is used mostly for scientific research, medical technology, and high-tech manufacturing and national defense. The sale and subsequent transfer marks the end of an era and successful transition to private industry. This was already in 24. So we're at 24, we're in the middle of a starting world crisis, and they're still thinking that the idea to sell this and finalize that sale was a good idea.
Well, did you notice a common theme between the dates?
What, between the beginning of 24 and the end of 24?
No, 1996.
Oh, well.
2013 and 2024. What's the common theme?
Elections.
These were under all three Democratic administrations.
Huh. That is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. But, you know, the blue team is better. The blue team's better, Jen. Remember that. Very important.
This is what people need to. So that program, the federal helium program, began in 25 when Congress recognized the need to ensure that helium would be available for defense needs. Also, let's keep in mind that that was long before they knew what other things it could be used for, in terms of they didn't necessarily predict AI and or MRI machines. So this whole idea was based on we might need that.
Yes.
And then the the neolibs came in and they said, no, we'd rather have the money. We don't need the helium. We'll take the money. We're rich enough that if we ever need helium, we'll be able to buy helium. So we don't need to have reserves. So anyhow, bringing it full circle, we cannot afford a helium shortage in this country. We really can't. And what scares me the most, all right, you could take that away. What scares me the most is the fact that we all know that the priority for helium is going to go to AI, not to MRI. It's going to go to the military. It's not going to go to the people that need it.
Whatever the billionaire Zionist ruling class wants, that's who's getting it.
So when people want to talk about how the free market is better in terms of healthcare, this is Exhibit A. Okay. The free market is what allowed all the sale of helium. And so now we are dependent on those people that have no rules or restrictions into what they could charge. I mean, who knows? And we now are dependent on them to buy what we need for healthcare purposes.